Hi, welcome back to JV Foodie Cooks. Today is National Peach Cobbler Day. Peaches are one of my daughter's favorite fruits. We're doing this thing. Let's go. To start this shindig off, we're going to take a little bit of avocado spray oil from Trader Joe's and grease a 9 by 13 inch glass baking dish. If you are following the recipe I'm going to provide a link down below because that's what I was using for this recipe, you would then assemble your entire cobbler mixture in the actual glass baking dish. So I dumped my peaches into the glass baking dish and then realized that mixing the frozen peaches with everything else for the filling was going to be incredibly messy for me. So I changed my mind and back into the bowl it went. We're going to assemble everything in my stand mixer bowl. So in your bowl, you should start with two 20-ounce bags of frozen peaches. For those of you who like the grams, it's 1,145-ish grams worth of frozen peaches. To your peaches, you are now going to add 1 cup or about 200 grams of granulated white sugar, 1 cup or about 220 grams of brown sugar. Then I am actually measuring out, because you know how I feel about measuring out vanilla, but I actually did it here, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then this is optional, but you should do it. Half a teaspoon of almond extract. And you actually want to make sure you measure this out. Almond extract is notoriously strong in flavor, so being a little heavy-handed can lead to a very overwhelming almond flavor. And if you don't like that, or that's not what you're looking for, then make sure you are careful and you measure this out. You want just half a teaspoon. Following your extracts, you are then going to add half a tablespoon of ground cinnamon and half a teaspoon of ground nutmeg. I had these in the same bowl. I gave them a good little swirl before dumping them into my frozen peach mixture. Up next is going to be 2 teaspoons or about 5.5 grams of cornstarch. Then you are going to add 1 teaspoon or about 4 grams of cream of tartar. Up next is going to be 2 ounces or half a stick of room temperature unsalted butter. And last but not least, a couple of liquids. We have 2 tablespoons or about 30 milliliters of water, and then you are going to end this out with 1 teaspoon or about 5 milliliters of lemon juice. Once you have everything you need for your cobbler filling in your bowl, you're going to give this a good mix until everything is combined. And I don't really know why I put gloves on for this. You don't need gloves to do this. It would be perfectly fine if you're just feeding yourself and your family. So no need for the gloves. I guess I just didn't want to get my hands dirty this day, but anywho, just mix it up until it's combined and everything's mixed well together. After everything's combined, it's now time to go back into our greased baking dish. Now, as I was dumping my peaches out, I realized some of my butter that was room temperature had gotten hard from interacting with the cold peaches, so it had stuck to the bottom with some of the sugar. Just scrape that out and try and spread it evenly amongst the top of the peaches. It should all melt once in the oven with all that heat and be okay. Then you're going to cover this bad boy with some foil to get it ready to go into the oven. Your peaches are going into a 375-degree oven for at least 20 minutes, and if you don't live in the United States, 375 degrees works out to be about 190 degrees Celsius. Now, while your peaches are cooking in the oven, we need to make some topping. To do this topping, we are going to need 2 cups or about 240 grams of flour. I am using the same bowl I used for my peaches because why dirty another bowl? This will work just fine. Half a cup or about 100 grams of granulated white sugar. Half a cup or 110 grams of brown sugar. 2 tablespoons or about 22 grams worth of baking powder, not baking soda, baking powder. Half a tablespoon of ground cinnamon. And then half a teaspoon or about 3 grams of salt before you give this all a good mix and get it combined. Once you have all of your dry ingredients for your topping combined, you now need to acquire your cold butter. You need 1 full stick or about 113 grams worth of cold butter. I cut my stick up a little bit into smaller pieces for this because you are going to cut the butter into your dry ingredients. So there are a few ways you can cut butter into your dry ingredients. The first one is using a pastry cutter, which I do not own, so that wasn't an option for me. If you own one, I'm sure it makes your life a whole lot easier. Option number 2 is using 2 forks. I don't like this method. Using 2 forks to cut butter into my dry ingredients is the bane of my existence. I don't actually find it that helpful, but if you do, that's great, and if that works for you, go for it. Option number 3 is what I landed on, using my hands. Using your hands for something like this is actually really helpful as well because you can feel the pieces of butter and how well it's getting incorporated into the flour. Would highly recommend. Once you have achieved a coarse meal type texture to this after adding your butter, it's now time for your hot water. So you're going to take your 1/4 of a cup or about 60 milliliters of boiling hot water and add it to your flour/butter mixture. You're then just going to stir this until it's just combined, and then you should have a drop biscuit-like texture. At this point, you should take your peaches out of the oven if you haven't done so already and check and see how they are doing. When I pulled them out of the oven the first time, I realized my butter hadn't really melted a whole lot. The peaches had released a lot of juice, and honestly, it needed to go back in the oven. I could just tell that putting the topping on top of that wasn't going to go well, so I actually put mine back in the oven for an additional 15 minutes before I put the topping on. Once I got my peaches in a position where I felt like it would be okay if I put the topping on top, I then used an ice cream scoop, or is this a cookie scoop? I can never remember, and scooped the topping onto it, and I tried to space them out as nicely as I could because you want to have some space for them to expand, but I did end up having a little extra dough after all of the scoops, so I did end up sprinkling that around and in between the spaces. It'll work out okay anyways. It came out delicious, so don't worry. Your peaches will not be fully covered no matter what you do, so if you're looking for a full blanket coverage of your peaches, that's just not going to happen. You don't want that anyways. That would be a lot of dough, so it's okay that you can still see the peaches underneath as you go ahead and get ready to put this all back into the oven. But there's one last thing this recipe calls for you to do before putting it in the oven, which you don't have to do if you don't like a crunchy sugar topping, but I would highly recommend it. It was good, is to take a little bit of a cinnamon sugar mixture and sprinkle it on top of the dough. The recipe I'm using called for 3 tablespoons or about 37 grams of granulated white sugar with half a tablespoon of ground cinnamon. I mixed those up and then I gave it a little sprinkle on top of my dough, and I didn't even use the whole amount that the recipe told me to make, which, like I said, is up to you. If you wanted to use the whole amount or not use any at all, that'd be perfectly acceptable. At this point, you should still have your oven set to 375 or 190, however you are listening to this, and this whole mixture is going back into that oven for 30 to 45 minutes or until you start to see the top of your biscuits get a nice golden brown color. Now, in full transparency, I ended up with a very, very liquidy cobbler. At 45 minutes, this was really liquidy, and I do know that as things cool, they will set. Mine did not set. At an hour, 2 hours, it was still sloshing around like water in a bucket. So I actually ended up removing just a touch of the liquid and putting it back in the oven again and cooking for an additional 20 minutes before I finally got that cobbler filling. I also want to note that I believe this was entirely user error. I don't think I did a great job mixing everything in the beginning when the peaches just went into the oven. I felt like I could have let that go longer and I could have done a better job with making sure all of the ingredients were evenly combined. So I think that is entirely on me and why I didn't thicken up. One thing I would maybe suggest doing is instead of just dumping the cornstarch and the water in separately in the beginning, I would make a slurry out of it. So I would add the cornstarch to that water in that little bowl, stir it up, get that nice and mixed, and then add it so it could be more evenly distributed, but that's for another day. Once all that's said and done though, this recipe leads to a delicious peach cobbler. The peaches are tender, they're not overly sweet, there's a beautiful cinnamon flavor, that touch of nutmeg in there is delicious, this vanilla, the touch of almond, it's all really, really good. The topping is delicious. I could eat just the topping for days. I did add ice cream because who doesn't want some vanilla ice cream with some like slightly warmed peach cobbler? It's just delicious. Like I said, would make this again, would highly recommend. Everyone loved this who tried it, so I hope you give this recipe a try. If there's another peach cobbler recipe you think I would love or that I should try, leave the link down below in the comments, and I look forward to hearing how you spent National Peach Cobbler Day. And until next time, bye-bye!